Hello and welcome. I'm your host, William Liu. You are listening to the Hello and Welcome podcast presented by Betway. Going solo here on a Tuesday afternoon. Happy Canada Day, by the way, to everybody. Enjoy the long weekend. In the NBA circles, it is not Canada Day. In the NBA circles, it's day 2 of NBA free agency, and a lot has taken place. We'll actually get to more of the bigger details in terms of the Milwaukee Bucks waving and stretching Damian Lillard and then also getting Miles Turner. That's all pretty wild. But we'll get to that tomorrow. There's more news around the league. Obviously, Shea, and speaking of Happy Canada Day, Shea signs the biggest contract in NBA history, 4 years for, I believe, 280 for the reigning MVP of everything. That's regular season, that's the finals, that's the conference finals. Big congratulations to Shea. Again, we'll talk about that all tomorrow. But first, I want to talk about two items here that took place with the Toronto Raptors today in the news. Okay, so first item is that the Raptors have made probably their one and only signing in free agency. The Raptors reportedly add forward/center Sandro Mamukelashvili to a 2-year, $5.5 million contract. This was reported by Shams Charania of ESPN. The second year is a player option. So basically, you are getting him for a year, seeing how it fits. And then if it really pops for him, I think Sandro has the chance to go back into free agency and explore further options. Otherwise, I think for the Raptors definitely needed a backup big to play in the rotation, somebody who can knock out 10, 15 minutes a game and just be a really solid, reliable player for you. My first impression is I think this definitely signals the end of Chris Boucher in Toronto. That was always quite likely for the longest serving and last remaining member of the 2019 championship team. Chris Boucher obviously was folded out of the rotation both in the last 2 seasons. And of course, that kind of coincided with Darko and changing the system here in Toronto. I do think that Sandro probably plays the system better in Toronto as compared to maybe what Chris did. Sandro has more of that playmaking, that ball handling that you want to see out of the Raptors in terms of that front court center position. But at the same time, I do think that even though they're not the same player, I think functionally actually do similar things in terms of Sandro, for example, is largely a stretch big. I would say that he's probably more of a 4 than he is a 5. For example, when he plays for the Georgian national team, he's playing the 4 rather than playing the 5. They got Goga Pataze playing more of the traditional 5 in that sense. Sandro, I think probably depending on sort of what lineups you want to play with and get away with it. He is 6'10" in shoes, about 240 pounds. So he has the size to nominally be a backup center for you. But at the same time, he's largely a guy that you play for his spacing, for his ability to function on offense. Interesting player, certainly. He has had a pretty cool journey to date. I actually just looked it up a little bit, so I'll tell you a bit of the story. So he's Georgian American. He's actually born in New York City, but grew up largely in Georgia, in Tbilisi, the capital city of Georgia. He actually speaks 4 languages. He speaks Georgian, he speaks Russian, he speaks Italian, and also English. Georgian and Russian, owing to the fact that he grew up in Georgia. Italian, owing to the fact that he played a lot of his youth career in Italy. He spent, I think, 4 years in Italy around the time of high school. Then he went to America to play both high school, his final year of high school, and also in college. Funny story there is that he went to Montverde in the same year with RJ Barrett. So he actually does have a teammate on the team, although we'll see what happens to RJ at the Raptors. But he has played with RJ. That was the same year, by the way. Andrew Nemhard was also on that same Montverde team. But went to Montverde, similar to many, many top prospects in the league that you see here today. Obviously, Scotty Barnes is another famous Montverde graduate. After that point, he played 4 years at Seton Hall, kind of started slow, but really, really came on strong. Towards the end, he was first team in his conference, became a really good player for Seton Hall. That led him to the draft in 2021, ends up being the 54th pick, which ultimately lands with the Milwaukee Bucks. He signs a 2-way deal at that time. Actually, I do remember seeing him a couple of times just playing against the Raptors between those Bucks and the Raptors games. Obviously, he was a 2-way, so he largely came off the bench and, largely in garbage time. But, I think he left a bit of an impression as somebody who has some skill, has some offense, certainly lefty, can shoot the 3 ball, and then handle it just a decent amount. You know what I mean? Like he's definitely a power forward, but, has a good functional handle, a decent passer. I think that I think that more than anything else is owing to the fact that he has so much of his career spent in Europe in terms of the development. Because I think the European game, certainly the way they develop, they don't put you in a box. They develop everybody the same, whether that's bigs, wings, or guards. And so it's not unnatural at all to see European bigs come out with a diverse skill set, especially for the bigs. So he gets waived in March of 2023. The Bucks, obviously, at that point, they're trying to make the playoffs. They're making playoff chases, so they're probably not necessarily needing the roster spot. I don't even know why he got waived, to be honest. But he was picked up by the Spurs on waivers. That's where he spent the last 2 seasons with the Spurs. Last year with the Spurs, I think probably, if you want to call it a breakout season, I think he's actually done decently in the 2 years with San Antonio. He averaged 6.2 points per game in just about 12 minutes per game, shot 48% from the field and 35% from 3. Rebounded the ball 3.7 times per game, and not too much of an impact on the defensive end. He has a couple of nice blocks. He's got decent athleticism, I would say, but more than anything else, I think he's on the floor for his offense. I think one way to illustrate this is if you just look at his shot chart from last season. As you can see here, most of the plays are above the 3 in terms of just the 3-point shot. Didn't shoot it much in the corners, but I actually prefer this in terms of just a shooting profile. I think more than anything else, it shows you an ability to play pick and pop at the top of the floor, spread it out on the wing, and of course, San Antonio, they typically did not play him at center. They typically had Wemby with him, so Wemby will be the center in that sort of situation. Or they even had a Zach Collins, running beside him, a Charles Bassey running beside him. So Mamu was mostly the 4 more than anything else, but I actually really prefer guys who can really shoot it well from the top of the floor rather than the corners. You're just not seeing a lot of playmaking in the corners. That's more for guys who can stand still and wait in the corners and convert. But it actually is a good sign to me that he shot it so well from above the arc. You saw here for the podcast audience, he went 19 of 43 from the left wing. He went 14 of 35 from the top of the floor, and he went 17 of 47 from the right wing. That averages out roughly to shooting 40% above the break, which I think is a nice number. He also obviously played a lot near the basket, as you would imagine, just for a big. Basically, so threes and dunks is sort of the primary things that he was doing. He went 73 of 107 at the basket, 68%. Certainly just right around league average, or especially for a center, but I would even say above average, actually. In terms of his finishing, he gets above the rim a couple times, it's not like he's ground bound. I think what's interesting is he is a lefty, so if you see him shooting jumpers and stuff, he's definitely shooting with the left hand. But around the basket, especially when you look at some of the highlights, he's actually finishing both with the left and the right hand, both with dunks, both with layups and stuff like that. So being ambidextrous around the basket certainly gives you a lot more options, especially as a post player and with a bit of craft on that front. But I will say that primarily he's going to be a guy who shoots the 3. Again, if you look at the shooting profile, it's very similar to a Chris Boucher, for example, which I guess he is actually coming in to directly replace. If I imagine his role with the Raptors, I think probably he plays. Well, definitely, I think he's in the rotation for the most part, but he's probably closer to that 9th and 10th man sort of position. I do think that he'll probably play alongside of one of Jonathan Mobo or Colin Murray-Boyles. I think that gives you 2 quote-unquote bigs. Neither of them are true bigs in the sense that neither of them are 7-footers. But I think that, you have a decent amount of length on the floor. And, of course, maybe you would be more comfortable switching Jonathan Mobo, or you're switching Colin Murray-Boyles, kind of switching them 1 through 5, as the Raptors would likely to do with the second unit. But I also think that second unit could use an older guy. Sandro is 26 years old. He's played, 4 seasons in the NBA now. I know he's not a long-time player. He's never been a starter. He's largely been a backup. But at the same time, somebody with experience, somebody who can stretch it out, because I just think that somebody to run a little bit more of the offense for the second unit, I think is going to be kind of interesting. So he can either play on or off the ball, which I think is again something that they really need. And similar to how the Raptors built the bench mob in the past, right? When you think about when the Raptors had that great season in 2018. The starters were experienced players, right? Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, Jonas Valanciunas, Serge Ibaka, and then OG Anunoby was the lone rookie with that group. But, he did a really good job, actually, with that group. But it was mostly experienced in the first unit. But that second unit, it was like Fred VanVleet, it was DeLon Wright. Sometimes it was Norman Powell, although Norman was kind of in and out of the rotation that year. You had Pascal Siakam and Jakob Poeltl, but then you had CJ Miles as sort of that more veteran hand. Now, of course, CJ at that point was like a 12-year vet. Sandro's nowhere near the experience of what CJ did, but I think functionally it can be a little bit similar in terms of just that older player, certainly more advanced offensively as compared to maybe the current Raptors bigs, especially with the jump shot, and then just being able to sort of flow in and out of that group. So I like this. I think the other part to really note with Sandro is that, I mean, I just kind of like his personality seems kind of interesting. This is a courtesy of Bleacher Report,
through
House of Highlights. But they actually did a little video here where they actually got him to explain his tattoos. He's got both his left arm and left leg. He basically has a sleeve all the way down the left side of his body. And well, I mean, I'll play it here first and foremost. I'll let him explain, but then I'll sort of like comment on it afterwards. But again, this is credit to House of Highlights for this.
You want to walk us through each of these tattoos?
Kung Fu Panda. Growing up, me and my brother used to watch it. The quote from Kung Fu Panda, which I got in the back. Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, but today's a gift. That's why it's called the present.
All right, then we got Bikini Bottom.
So 3 brothers. This is me, personality like SpongeBob. This is where I grew up, like my first basketball court. It was like cracks all over the place. My middle brother is like Squidward. He used to be like, oh, just leave me alone. I don't want to hang out with y'all type of guys. My oldest brother, I'll put him as Patrick. Questionable sometimes, but you know, we love him and everything. So I've kind of like made a Bikini Bottom theme about like my life. This is Beat the Odds. I was drafted 54th, so I want to beat the odds. Go from the pawn to the queen, which is considered as species. Then I have Tree of Life with basketball. I put it when I started playing basketball. By the end, when I'm done, I'll put some flowers in it. That means it grew and kind of did its purpose. Grew up loving tattoos, and I feel like a lot more are coming, so stay tuned.
Oh, wow. You know what? I didn't even know that his whole body was tattooed, too. His whole chest and everything. I guess the only thing is his right hand, which I'm assuming he's going to fill that out, too. But actually, part of the reason I wanted to bring you this was I'm always a big fan of people with, well, not a big fan. I'm just always very curious when people have Chinese tattoos. And if we just pause the video here, you actually will see a big Chinese character on his leg right there above the 24, which obviously for Kobe, and then the Kung Fu Panda tattoo he was explaining. In between, there's the word family in Chinese, jia. So I just thought it was actually really interesting that he has a Chinese tattoo as well. But yeah, I mean, Sandro's, he's got an interesting story, first and foremost. I believe I'm pretty sure he's the only Georgian player in the NBA right now. It's actually a nice little documentary that you can find. I guess I'll link it in the comments. But there is a nice little documentary that's like 16 minutes that really details sort of his upbringing. It takes you back home to where he grew up in Georgia, in Tbilisi, and in his journey to the NBA at that point. Certainly very rural, very rustic lifestyle. It seems like a lot of his childhood was playing with his brothers and growing grapes for wine, which does sound pretty amazing. But in any case, I'm personally maybe very curious about that part of the world, Eastern Europe, even Central Asia, and obviously Georgia is right there in between everything. So that was actually really cool to just get to know Sandro. But I think more than anything else, back to the Raptors part, and maybe not just my own personal interests, I think that this does kind of keep the Raptors roster fairly set. If I just like roughly put the depth chart here, and this doesn't say anything other than just guards, wings, and bigs. I think the Raptors are largely set in terms of that sense, because you have 4 guards on the Raptors: Emmanuel Quickley, Jamal Shed, Elijah Martin, and then Garrett Temple, who obviously is the other free agent signing the Raptors have brought back here. In terms of the wings, you have Scotty Barnes, Brandon Ingram, RJ Barrett, Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, Jamison Battle, Jacoby Walter. And then in terms of bigs, you have Jakob Poeltl, Colin Murray-Boyles, Jonathan Mobo, and then now Sandro Mamukelashvili. Yeah, I mean, I think that's 15 players. Obviously, there's the 2 ways to be filled. I think the Raptors have signed Chucky Hepburn to a 2-way contract, so that's one of their current spots. Another one will be Ulrich Shamshay, and then another one, obviously, will be Jared Rhoden, although we'll see. I do have an inkling that maybe the Raptors want to slide Elijah Martin also into a 2-way, but personally speaking, I think I'd probably rather sign him to a 3-year standard contract, minimum contract for second-round players. I think there's probably just more team control in general on that sense. But we'll see. I mean, those are all relatively small accounting sort of factors. But you have 4 guards, you got 4 bigs, you got 7 wings. That's 15 players. I think the roster kind of is set as is. Of course, we'll see. The Raptors will definitely bring players into training camp, give them incentives, exhibit 10s and stuff like that. Basically, all just little bits of bonuses that maybe they'll come to summer league, maybe they'll come to training camp for you, maybe they'll ultimately be on the 905 for you, and the Raptors can keep track of the players there. But in terms of just the roster as is, I think it's mostly set. Now, granted, there probably will be trades because the current team as is actually slightly over the luxury tax, and I don't think the Raptors are anywhere close to be good enough to have to pay the luxury tax. Quite frankly, it's not just about being above the tax to be able to pay into the tax, which is one thing. Whatever, that's one thing. The reason why most teams want to duck the luxury tax is if you're under the luxury tax, that means you are getting the payments from everyone else who do pay the luxury tax, which means you're not. It's not just a difference of being in the tax by whatever amount. The Raptors probably only in the tax by 1 or 2 million as is. But if you duck the tax, you probably get like 15 to 20 million of a payout. So it's actually a pretty. I mean, look, the Raptors are not going to be paying the luxury tax this year. That's just, that doesn't even have anything to do with them being cheap or anything. I really just don't think that they should be in the luxury tax. They paid the luxury tax once in their entire NBA career, and that was 2019 when they won the chip. So they would have paid in 2020 to keep that chip team together, but again, Kawhi left. So that's the roster kind of as is. I do think that, again, because the Raptors are slightly in the luxury tax, I think that you can see probably, if I had to predict one of two moves, the bigger one would be some sort of decision on RJ Barrett to either trade him for a slightly smaller contract and take on hopefully not too much future money. I think RJ, for me at least, I would say he's certainly played himself into being a slightly positive asset. I think he's on the books this year for 26. He's got 27 next year. Only reason I say he's slightly positive is because of the fact that I think that he probably wants an extension. And especially looking at today's NBA market, I don't necessarily see that in place for RJ, but especially not a raise to, let's say, 30 million per year, which currently he's just under right now. So that's probably the bigger move, is potentially if the Raptors move RJ Barrett. A smaller move, if they want to just do something smaller to get under that tax, would probably just be to flip Ochai Agbaji for future picks. I think that even though Ochai did a really good job last year with the Raptors and played his role decently as a 3-and-D guy, converted well, I think he established himself first and foremost a lot better than what he was previously with Utah. But the issue for me is just like the Raptors have so many guards and so many shooting guards in particular. And if Ochai was bigger, he could probably play some small ball like 3. Like if you could play 3 or maybe even small ball 4, I definitely look to keep Ochai around. But if he can't really do that for me, and he's in competition with Grady Dick, he's in competition with Jakob Poeltl, I just don't think he'll win that outright long term, especially because the Raptors have way more invested into Grady and Jacoby, and they're cheaper for a longer period. So I'll see if the Raptors can, if the Raptors just flip Ochai for future picks and don't take back salary, I think the Raptors are definitely comfortably under the tax. But I think as is, the roster is largely set. So that's Sandro Mamukelashvili. He comes in. And again, I think he probably will be 9th, 10th man in that rotation. Certainly a good piece for the second unit. The other bit of news, which I actually delayed the first reaction video to Sandro signing, I should just redid the video, is the fact that the Raptors also announced an extension for Jakob Poeltl, reportedly for 4 years, $104 million. This was also first reported by Shams Charania of ESPN. So first off, a couple of details in this. So the contract extension is actually a 3-year extension that's tacked on to the end of his current deal. So what Jakob Poeltl has in his current deal right now is a $19.5 million player option for the 2026-2027 season. So right now he's actually only through 2 years of his contract. It was a 4-year, $80 million contract. He's through 2 years of it. Next year he'll be making $20 million for the 2025-2026 season. The following season he had a player option for 2026-2027. He has now picked up that option and then tacked on 3 additional years. So for financial purposes, he will be counting for $20 million for the next 2 seasons, this upcoming season and the following season, ending in 2027. And then roughly, I'm not totally sure how they, shaped the contract too much in terms of just like if they escalated it, if they de-escalated it. To be honest, I don't even know. That's more of a Blake Murphy question. But roughly speaking, he'll be making $28 million for the 3 following years. In 2027, 2028, 28 in 2028, 2029, and then 29, 2030. To get a clearer picture, hopefully, of the Raptors salary cap, I'm gonna just sketch this really quickly for you guys. This is off of the Basketball Reference salary page. So as you can see here, I guess for the YouTube audience, for the podcast audience, I'll try to describe it. The Toronto Raptors salary is, again, like the roster I think is largely set, barring some sort of RJ trade, barring some sort of Ochai dump. That's sort of the roster as is for next year. The following year, I think the Raptors are actually largely set there as well. The key decisions there would be what they want to do with Grady Dick moving forward. I think that him going into his third year, if he plays really well, there's an extension possibility at the end of the next season for Grady Dick, but he's still under cost control. Ochai Agbaji, if the Raptors keep him around, I suppose there is a qualifying offer there as well in Green. To be honest, that would be the most easy and more convenient. Like, it'll be way easier to dump Ochai than it would be to flip RJ and also get back less salary in return. Of course, the Raptors still have plenty of players on rookie scale contracts, like Jakob Poeltl, Jonathan Mobo will be on the deals, Jamal Shed. Those guys are currently like unguaranteed, but I mean, the Raptors will definitely pick those guys up. I mean, those guys are pretty productive players. Jamison Battle, I think, is going to be really interesting there as well. That should also be in red. That's my bad. Both of those years should be in red for Jamison Battle in terms of they're not guaranteed yet. But in any case, Raptors hold the options and team control over all those players. What's really interesting to me is that, like, the roster is pretty much set, at least for the next 2 years. I think that, like, financially they're in a decent position in terms of just not necessarily having too much bad money on their books. I would say that in terms of the lowest value in terms of the contract, probably IQ. I think that a fully healthy IQ probably is like a $25 million per year player. Right now, obviously, he's getting paid 32 flat for the next 4 seasons, so there is a bit of a premium on that. Brandon Ingram, obviously, he's going to start his contract at $38 million, move up to 40, and then go up to 42. I think the last year is actually a player option. So basically, the Raptors have a 2-year trial here with Brandon, and I guess likewise for Brandon, he has a 2-year trial to see if the Raptors have been a good fit for him or not. And of course, the only 2 long-term contracts you really see, well, actually 3, I guess. The 3 long-term contracts you see are Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickly, and Jakob Poeltl. Jakob Poeltl now joined Scotty as the only players on the books for the 2029-2030 season. At that point, Jakob will be 34, and Scotty would be into his late 20s, I believe 28. So that's kind of the roster as is. Again, I'm pretty confident the Raptors can duck the tax in the following years. If the Raptors add another draft pick into their group after the end of next season, I think the Raptors probably will need to necessitate and move a couple more pieces around. So again, that's something to consider. But as of right now, I think the roster and the salary from that perspective, I think is mostly set. From a personnel standpoint, in terms of just keeping Jakob around, I know there's probably maybe a little sticker shock in terms of just like, wait, hold on, like that's a decent amount of money. I think it's actually comparable to the contract that shocked free agency today on day 2. The Milwaukee Bucks obviously waived Damian Lillard. By the way, that's a huge waive. That's like I think there was 2 years, about $100+ million on left on his deal. If they stretch that over 5 years, I think that means that they have $22 million of dead cap every single year on their books for the next 5 years, which is just absurd, just to get rid of Damian Lillard. By the way, Dame can now go anywhere, sign for the minimum, basically. Like, he could literally go anywhere in the league, sign for the minimum, and still be effectively paid the max by Milwaukee. Milwaukee has now just sponsored Dame to chase and Dame, by the way, has not had a championship famously. Dame can go anywhere for the minimum, get paid like a maximum, and then join a team. Like, he could go to the Lakers, he can go to the Warriors, he can go wherever he wants. It's actually kind of absurd. I've really never seen a scenario like this. This is by far the biggest stretch provision used ever. But on the flip side of this, the Bucks were able to use their suddenly available cap space to then go out and sign Miles Turner away from the Indiana Pacers. That was for a 4-year, $107 million deal. So, Turner, roughly the same age as Jakob. Very different players in terms of Turner, certainly more of an outside shooter, space it out, maybe more of a shot blocker than Jakob, versus Jakob is more of a positional defender, and also much more effective in the paint as compared to Miles Turner. But I would say they're probably on the same level. They're just very different styles of players, obviously. But I think effective-wise, like, I mean, I don't know. I also saw Miles Turner a lot throughout the playoffs. He was the one guy for Indiana where, if you notice down the stretch, remember Indiana had all those amazing comebacks? almost every single one of those comebacks was they would sub out Miles Turner and put in Obi Toppin. So he was already their least valuable fifth starter. We can say that much. In any case, that's also just matchup dependent, especially nowadays. Centers are the most matchup hunted types of players. And so very similar, comparable deal to the one that Miles Turner got. I think that, for the Raptors, like, there probably isn't too much surplus trade value on Jakob, especially on his current deal. He's probably, I would say, even value. I think previous to this, he was probably a positive value. Certainly you saw that the Raptors had some trade discussions this past summer. Actually, the Raptors have had a pretty busy summer, all things considered. But, I think once the decision was made that the Raptors were not going to trade Jakob Poeltl in any sort of trade arrangement potentially for Kevin Durant, for example, with Phoenix, I think that was pretty clear that the Raptors are going to extend Jakob because, you make that decision right there and then. Are you going to move long term with him, or are you going to try to cash in for him right now? Again, if you trade a Jakob in the market right now, probably can get a first round pick. But again, can a first round pick return to you pretty good starter level? Like, Jakob's probably going to be like consistently between the 10th and 15th best center in the league. So like a average to above average starting center. Honestly, that's how much this costs. Like, especially a veteran. On his, I guess those would be on his third or fourth deal now. This is kind of the league average price. So I don't think there's much value built into this, as in, like, I don't think this is a steal, but I don't think this is an overpay necessarily either until maybe towards the end of the last season. He doesn't have much of an injury history as well. Knock on wood for that, because we definitely need Jakob. But you at least have some clarity. The roster kind of is what it is, and I think that the potential and maybe the future value of the Raptors comes from, number one, can Scottie take the next step? I know we've been saying this for several years, but I think there still is realistically some more untapped potential with Scottie. Obviously, him coming off of his rookie scale deal into a max contract certainly has to now provide at a higher level. But ultimately, is there a little bit more with Scottie? And then of course the rookies, right? Like, I'm looking at Jamal Shed, Jacoby Walter. I'm looking at Colin Murray-Boyles, Elijah Martin. These type of players, is there the upside there to not just become good rotation players, but maybe even more? Is there a future starter in that group? And I think that more than anything else will determine the upward trajectory of how the Raptors go. Of course, you need the health of Brandon Ingram and Emmanuel Quickley. I think both of those guys are pretty good players when they're healthy. And then we'll see what the Raptors ultimately do on the wing. They definitely have one too many wings, and I think they have a little bit too much salary. So, I mean, to be fair, the Raptors don't even have to clear under the luxury tax until the trade deadline. So the Raptors could very well go into the season with the roster as is and then make a decision closer to the trade deadline. You see that all the time. But yeah, I think that's sort of the roster as is. So big day for Raptors news, in terms of the Raptors basically completing the 15-man right now by adding Sandro Mamukelashvili, and then also adding another 3 years to Jakob Poeltl's contract to make him. I mean, Jakob's going to end up as like the longest serving Raptors center after this point. I'm assuming he plays out the contract here, but he played 2 seasons with the Raps before he got traded in the Kawhi deal. Comes back. He's already been back for 2.5 seasons. Yeah, he's already been back for 2.5 seasons. He just added another 4 years to his I guess he's on the books for another 4 years after this. So Yak's gonna be around for a long time. So it's actually gonna be funny. I know there was a lot of like griping when there was a lot of griping honestly even when the Raptors drafted Jakob 9th overall back in 2016. There was definitely a lot of griping with the circumstances of him getting traded back to Toronto. Should they have whatever? I don't even want to rehash all this garbage, but it is kind of funny after all this time that he might just end up being the longest tenured Raptors center. I think the previously longest tenured Raptors center was probably JV at like 6, maybe 7 years. But yeah. Congrats to Jakob. Congrats to Sandro. The Raptors, I think this probably concludes most of their big moves, or most of their substantive moves. Again, if I see another prediction in terms of what the Raptors will do, I think they'll probably do something involving either Ochai Agbaji or RJ Barrett this summer in terms of trade. But if they don't do that, I think they can also roll into the season and address this closer to the trade deadline, because it's not ultimately that difficult for the Raptors to get under the luxury tax. So Thanks everyone for listening. Let us know what your thoughts are on Sandro. Let us know what your thoughts are on the Jakob Poeltl extension. And of course, we'll be back on Wednesday at noon. We're gonna go live, myself, Alex Wong, and a guest, and we're gonna react to just all the transactions that took place in the NBA and probably get their thoughts on the Toronto Raptors as well. So thanks everyone for listening. This has been the Hello Welcome podcast presented by Betway, and we'll catch you tomorrow.